Good afternoon. Welcome to another one of our comparative religions classes here at Rydal Park. I hope you're all having a wonderful day and have an opportunity to sit back and relax and listen to a program today that should be of interest. We've been looking over the past couple of months at all of the various congregations, the denominations, the expressions of Christianity here, and particularly in the United States. We have looked at everything from the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther and John Calvin. We've watched the development of many different denominations. We've seen the impact that they have had in our world and in our society. We've looked at some of the new religions that have started as an offshoot of Christianity, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. We've looked at the Christian Science traditions, the Quakers. We've looked at many of these different organizations. One of the issues that has been going on in Christianity here in the United States for a very long time, and actually even in Europe, this is something that has had a phenomenal impact. I remember being a pastor of churches and serving several different congregations over the years, and being confronted by the recognition that church attendance has been declining ever since the end of World War II. And congregations are always worried and concerned about attracting new, younger people, new families, young children. They want to bring them all in so that the church will begin to grow and flourish as it did back in the heyday of Protestant Christianity in the 1940s and 50s and in through even the 1960s. But we've seen a steady, significant decline in church participation ever since the end of World War II, and it's continuing to go on even today. What has happened is many young people have turned away from organized religion and either have dedicated themselves to doing something else or have just lost total interest at all, and they have fallen into a category which are called the nones, N-O-N-E-S. The nones are a group of people who, when they are filling out a questionnaire or a survey about their lifestyle choices and things like that, they will be asked about religious participation. They will be asked to identify with a religious organization like Judaism. And they would be asked, are you Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist? Where do you fit into this whole aspect of Judaism? Or they'll look at the Christian church and ask, are you Roman Catholic? Are you Protestant? If you're Protestant, are you a Presbyterian, a Methodist, a Lutheran, all the way down the line? And finally, at the end of the survey, there is a box that they check that says none of the above. This group of people known as the nones. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, and something very unique that has developed here it started out in England, but it's developed very strongly here in America, what is called, you ready for this? The Church of the Atheist. What a wonderful term, the Church of the Atheist. This is new and modern in our world, and it is something that has become rather widespread. And I find it to be a fascinating thing, although putting the word church and atheist together in the same sentence, well, it is a little confusing. But let's see where that takes us. Pew Research. The Pew Foundation does a lot of research into religious questions and religious issues here in the United States. And what they have been doing is taking a look at this group of people called nones. And here's what they say. The number of Americans who don't affiliate with a particular religion has grown to 56 million people in recent years. 56 million. That is a huge group of people. And what the Pew Foundation says is that this group, called the nones, are the second largest number of people behind those who identify themselves as being evangelicals. This is according to the Pew Research Center study that was recently taken. I think it was 2015, 2016. It was not too long ago. What they have discovered is this. Between the year 2007 and 2014, when Pew conducted two major surveys of U.S. religious life, Americans who describe themselves as atheistic, agnostic, or of no particular faith, in other words, none of the above, they grew from 16% of the population to nearly 23%. A recent update from the Pew Foundation in 2018, 31% of the nuns say that they are either atheist or agnostic. Growing numbers all across the board, all around the United States. Now, the millennial generation, more than 1/3, 36%, decline to affiliate with any religion. These are kids that are now in their 20s and moving into their 30s, age-wise. The millennial generation are people who were born, right there in the 1990s into the early 2000s. They've been around for a while. They're the millennial generation. They are not affiliating with any religious group at all. They tend to shy away from them completely. As elderly Americans, I cringe at that term, elderly. Our chronologically enhanced Americans, who are far more religious, as we die off, they are being replaced demographically by what seems to be the most secular generation in America. The people who are coming up behind us, these would be our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, seriously. These are the kids that are basically turning away from religion very strongly. 36% of this generation declines to affiliate with any religious group. Pew breaks down these nuns into three separate categories. First off, there are those who declare themselves to be either an atheist or an agnostic, and they have no religious background or tradition whatsoever. There are those who claim to be nothing in particular, and they consider that religion either is not important or very little importance whatsoever. This group of people, according to the Pew Foundation, are kids whose parents and grandparents may have been very much attached to a congregation. They would identify with the traditions. We would perhaps look at somebody coming out of the traditions of Judaism, and we would say they're non-practicing Jews. They identify as Jewish people, but they do it from a secular perspective and not from a religious perspective. And they have very little importance attached to that claim of being a part of that group. In the Christian tradition, myself and other pastors, we have jokingly referred to people as the CMEs. This would be Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter. That's when you go to church. Other than that, you really don't go, and you have little importance of this in your life. And then there's a third group that the Pew Foundation recognizes of those who claim to be nothing in particular, but they consider religion to be somewhat or very important in their lives. These are people who will not get up and get out of bed to go to a Shabbat service on Saturday morning. They will not get up and go to church on Sunday morning. But at particular times in their lives, the religion will play an impact on them. And they will want to continue to carry on with some of the traditions of their religious belief because they may believe them to be very important. And so the significant events of life, like the birth of a child, marked by a bris in Judaism or by baptism in the Christian tradition, religious ceremonies like weddings and funerals. There's a lot of attachment to these things and very important to them, but they're really not making any specific claim to be any particular religious tradition. Many of the more aggressively secular people, surprisingly enough, find themselves lapsing into God talk. They claim to be non-believers whatsoever. They don't want to have any connection or attachment to a religious community, and yet they find themselves engaging in God talk. trying to figure out, why is everything happening? Is there a reason behind things occurring? Or what happens if you go through a difficult time? Death of a family member, a sickness, an illness, some other act of suffering. What's the meaning and purpose behind this? How do we understand these things? And the language that they use is God language, even though they claim not to believe. These statements need not be rooted in any particular historic religious tradition. But the language that is used is unmistakably religious. And they cannot escape from that, in spite of the fact that they do not believe and do not connect themselves with any specific religious tradition. Deep down in the experiences of life, this generation of nuns actually confess to believe a need for metaphysical understandings in order to make sense of their experiences in life and to make some sense of their moral convictions. They have beliefs about what is right and what is wrong. They have deep-held, passionate beliefs about how we should live as human beings that sound very biblical. And as they turn away from that, they have to find some kind of way of understanding this, and they turn to metaphysical understandings of the world, looking at the sources of origin, where we find a grounding for moral ideas, not in Scripture, but in other places. But the language that they use is religious. And as much as they try to deny it, religion, or the potential for religion, actually continues to hold a powerful grip on their souls. They cannot escape that reality that's there. And they try to hold on to it, and they try to find ways to make sense out of their experiences of life. Okay, a couple of categories here to look at in definitions of terms. Atheism. Atheism is a belief that there is no God. The word atheism comes from the Greek language atheos, meaning without God. There is no God. God does not exist. Atheists tend to be skeptical of any kind of supernatural claims and basically say there is no empirical evidence to show that any of these things could ever possibly have happened. The creation of the world is not explained by any kind of understanding of needing to have a God. It's there for some other way, and there's no empirical evidence to show that this happens. The best explanation so far in the tradition of atheism to understand why the world is the way it is basically is turning to the theory of evolution first put forward by Charles Darwin. The whole universe and everything that is a part of our world and our system and our lives is something that has evolved out of itself and has continued to evolve and continues evolution processes even today. This is how the world works, and this is why the world is the way that it is. We don't need to have an all-powerful deity to create these things. That is the basic tenet of atheism. Another term that we hear, agnosticism. Agnosticism is a view that human reason is incapable of providing a sufficient rational grounds to either justify the belief that God exists or to justify the belief that God does not exist. We simply don't have that kind of knowledge. We don't have that kind of understanding. Our human reason can't find a way to explain either the belief that God exists or the belief that God does not exist. We just simply cannot know. And therefore, apathetic agnosticism is basically the view that there is no proof. And if there is no proof, it doesn't matter whether there is a God or isn't a God, because there convinced that any deity that could exist is so unconcerned for the universe or for the welfare of its inhabitants, therefore has little or no impact on personal human affairs. We can't know anything about God. We can't tell you anything about God. We can't tell you what God is or if there is a God. And it's such a stretch to the human imagination that there's no way that we could ever possibly understand the existence of God. And if there is a God, and our world is in the shape that it is today, it just seems to prove that God is not interested in human beings and is not engaged in anything that is going on. There's no impact in personal human affairs. So, if that's the case, why have religion? Why have a religious belief that seems to be contrary to the human experience? So what do? Phil Zuckerman, who is a professor of secular studies at Pitzer College in Claremont, California, says this. In the United States, there's a little bit of a feeling that if you're not religious, you're not patriotic. And that's a real sense about the American cultural society in which we live. If you are a religious person, if you go to the synagogue, you go to the church, you go to a mosque or a temple, your religious beliefs are the things that make you a good American citizen. They're the things that make you patriotic. And the secular people are saying, wait a minute, we don't go to church. We don't have any religious beliefs whatsoever, but hey, we're good people. We're charitable. We're good parents. We're good citizens. We're just as good as everybody else is. We just don't go to church. But maybe if we start going to a church, we can prove that we are charitable, that we are good, that we're good parents, that we are good citizens. And so we begin looking at a possibility for what to do with the nuns. The group was called Sunday Assembly. It had its start in the year 2013. It was actually started by two British comedians, Sanderson Jones and Pippa Evans. And although they were comedians, they were very serious about this whole thing. They launched what was called the First Assembly in January of 2013 as a place where skeptics could feel welcome. I love the name that they give to it, Assembly. In our traditions of Judaism, the synagogue is a place of assembly. Actually, the Hebrew word that's used there is Knesset, as in Knesset Israel. The gathering of Israel would be a loose, rough translation into our English language. In the Christian tradition, we turn to the Greek language from the New Testament, and we have this gathering of believers that is called the ecclesia, from which we get ecclesiastics. It basically means a gathering of people. The ecclesia in the Christian tradition is the gathering of the church. An assembly is all it is. So we have a secular assembly that is beginning to meet where skeptics can come and can feel welcome. The movement has grown as doubters around the world have started up their own chapters. And the motto of Sunday Assembly is this, no matter where it is, whether it's in England or here in the United States: live better, help often, wonder more. And they encourage people to believe that you can be good without a God. And this is human nature. And that's what they seek to lift up. Jones got this first inkling for the idea while he was leaving a Christmas Carol concert. And here's what he said. If you think about church, there's very little that's bad. It's singing awesome songs. Christmas carols are beautiful pieces of music that everybody listens to, no matter what your background is. Awesome songs. You go to church or to synagogue to hear an interesting talk. to think about improving yourself and ways to help other people, and doing that in a community with wonderful relationships. That's what our congregations are about. What's wrong with that? What's not to like, is what Jones was saying. There was so much about church that I loved, Jones says, but it's a shame because at the heart of it all, it's something I don't believe in. I don't believe in God, but I love the hymns. I don't believe in God, but the stories out of that book that they read and the message that that person up front talks about is something very important. The fact that there's a community here that cares for one another, this is all good stuff. It's a shame because I don't believe it. So the Sunday assembly was tapping into those people who left their faith behind but missed the community that the church or the synagogue provided. On September 28th, 2014, 35 towns across the world launched a new Sunday assembly. They were here in the United States. They were in various places in Europe, and particularly in England. There was a lot of attractiveness to this. And these are groups for people who claim to be secular humanists, free thinkers, skeptics, atheists, agnostics. All of them wanted to find a sense of community without having to deal with any of the God stuff. Can't we just get together and do something together that really gives us a sense of purpose and meaning and some goodness in our lives and brings us together as a community? The average size of assemblies around the world, according to the Pew Foundation, is that there are about 60 to 80 people who are present, which basically would put it into the category of a typical size of a Protestant church in America. 60 to 80 people in worship on Sunday, that's about the norm. The Sunday Assembly in London regularly has 300 to 400 attendees, but they still pretty much maintain this kind of really close community connections with 60 to 80 people. And here's something very interesting. In the first 6 months of 2014, when the assembly first was getting started around the world, each group connected with this Sunday assembly contributed approximately 150 hours of volunteering in the community as a part of their community of Sunday assembly. They're going out and doing good in the community as a group of people who are committed together to doing so. Mano Singham of Strongsville, Ohio, is a part of a Sunday assembly meeting out there, and this is what he reports. The central idea we have to spread is that we only have one life, which means that this life has to be lived to the fullest. Don't waste your life on things that are non-essential. You only have one life, and you have to live life to its fullest. There is no second chance. There's no opportunity to have a do-over. There's no afterlife where wrongs are righted and cosmic justice is meted out to evildoers. Everything that makes difference happens in this life. And you have to take advantage of that and live it every single day. Actually, that's not a bad idea. It's a real strongly religious understanding. The meetings are filled with songs. Now, in our traditions of Judaism, we have a whole bunch of music that we use during the worship service. Some of them are beautiful pieces of music. There's a whole tradition of songs that can be sung, and being a part of that in the Christian tradition, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hymns that we use. What do you do in a secular tradition? Well, you turn to people like Bon Jovi, Cat Stevens, the Beatles, folk music, rock music. It's all there. They have readings of different things. We'll look at that in a minute. Moments of silence where the congregants are left alone with their own thoughts and allowed to meditate or maybe even pray. This is something that becomes a part of these weekly gatherings. The music is always good and upbeat and meaningful. Some of these Sunday assembly congregations organize small groups where members of the organization can get together and do book studies or discuss philosophy or engage in other ways of looking at how they can make a difference in their own communities. And this is how they're described: a secular urban oasis where atheists could enjoy the benefits of a traditional church. They can have the sense of community. They can have a weekly sermon. They can have a time for reflection. They can get involved in community service. There's an ethos of self-improvement. There's singing. There's free food. All of it there for anybody who wants to come. And it's all without God. It's all very secular. It's all very humanistic. It is all very non-religiously religious. Herb Silverman, who's the founder of the Secular Coalition for America, writes this: a godless congregation is likely to draw big crowds if it appeals to what he calls big tent atheism, which includes agnostics, humanists, secular humanists, freethinkers, non-theists, anti-theists, skeptics, rationalists, naturalists, and more. The more inclusive you are, the more welcoming and embracing of all types of people, the more opportunity you have to really make an impact. And one of the surprising things here is, this is interesting, they will even welcome in believers who might be Jewish or Christian, Roman Catholic or something, and they just find themselves being attracted to this type of situation. They're welcomed. Kind of an interesting twist on things. So far, assembly sermonizers have included community workers, physicists, astronomers, wine writers, people that write about wine and how it's grown and how to tell good wines from bad wines. That would be a good topic for a Sunday talk, I guess. Futurologists, people about talking about what the future is going to look like and how we can shape the future. Happiness experts, video game enthusiasts, historians. One Sunday assembly in London has also invited an Episcopal priest, vicar, to come and give sermons from time to time. The idea here is the pulpit is open to anybody who has something to offer. As a talk on Sunday, as a way of giving some information, some education, some uplifting message, anybody is welcome to do so. And then we come to what is called the First Church of Atheism. This is American. The First Church of Atheism is formed around the belief that the mysteries of life can be explained solely through science and reason. We don't need a God. We don't need to have a theology. What we have is our scientific understanding, scientific rationale for the world, and the fact that you, as a human being, have the ability to use reason to figure out the way the world is. All of the mysteries of life can be explained through these things. Now here's interesting. The First Church of Atheism wants to provide a place for atheists to become ordained for free, as well as a hub for atheists to find ministers to perform their ceremonies. So what happens if you grow up in Judaism and you decide to get married? How do you get married without a rabbi, without the huppah and the stomping on the glass, right? This is a part of the tradition in the Jewish faith. What happens if you are Jewish and you are raising a child? You're all excited about childbirth and you have a son that is born. What's the first thing that you're going to do 8 days after the child is born? Right? What are you going to do for funerals and other ceremonies like bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, the things that mark those significant changes in life? It's great. If you're a Christian, whether you're Roman Catholic or Presbyterian or Methodist, it doesn't matter. You could go to your church and your parish minister or priest is going to be able to do the services for weddings and baptisms and confirmation classes and funerals and everything else like that. And it's all wrapped up and it's all a part of the tradition of that society that you belong to. What happens if you're an atheist? What do you do when you want to get married? Well, you could go to a justice of the peace. But if you're going to be a real true atheist in your beliefs and your traditions, are you going to go to a church to get married? Probably not. So the Church of the Atheist wants to be able to ordain people, men and women, to be able to perform the rituals and ceremonies that are so important to life. Marriage, birth of a child, significant changes in life, those opportunities for major ritual events like coming of age, or funerals. Somebody has to be able to do that, and the Church of Atheists wants to be able to ordain their own ministers to perform their own ceremonies to meet those secular needs that human beings have at significant events in life. Beliefs that they have in the church, the first church of atheism. Nothing exists beside natural phenomena. There is nothing outside of this world. There is nothing that stands apart from us or over us. Everything that exists is a part of the natural phenomena that we see and experience. Our thought is merely a function of all of those natural phenomena around us in the world. Death is complete, and death is irreversible. And we have faith solely in humankind, solely in nature, and in the facts of science. It is science and our ability for rational thought that allows us to see the world as it truly is, and to recognize that life is good, but you only have one life. You have to live that life to the best you possibly can, and death is complete. When death comes, there's nothing else. Death is not reversible. Death is the end of a story. Alain de Botton is a writer, philosopher, and an atheist, and how he describes the Church of Atheism is a growing sense that being virtuous had become a strange and depressing notion. When you're not attached to anything, you don't have any grounding, any faith base for your beliefs and your ethos. How do you try to figure out what it means to be virtuous? It becomes a very strange and depressing notion, as he puts it, but there are ways to get around that. He argues for a new breed of secular therapists to take the place of priests and ministers and rabbis, people that are trained in secular humanism, people who believe in atheism, and they should be the ones who become our new, I almost said spiritual leaders, but there's really no sense of belief in the spiritual in this type of situation, but they would become the new leaders of helping people to be able to develop a good sense of living with some values that will hold and endure. The project of being good, he says, is vital. Being a good person and doing what is good and right all the time is valuable. It's even more important than the project of being healthy. I think what he's trying to argue is that if we are not being good people, no matter how physically healthy we may be, our lives are really not truly being healthy. Goodness, virtue, has a place of great importance in the life of the individual. And so, he writes a book called Religion for Atheists. It's about the benefit of religion for those who don't believe in religion. The religious traditions have a benefit, but we need to get beyond that. We have to set up a whole new way of looking at this. As he puts it, it's clear to me that religions are, in the end, too complex, interesting, and on occasion too wise to be abandoned. We can't give up on religion. It's too important. It's too complex. It's interesting. On occasion, we get wisdom out of it, but we can't abandon all of that stuff just to people who simply believe in the religion. We need to have a whole new way of looking at the world, and looking at human behavior, looking at human virtue. And so what he develops are what are called 10 virtues for the modern world. And so the Church of Atheism has their equivalent of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments given to Moses by God and passed on through the traditions of Judaism and Christianity are the things that give us a guidance and a direction for living our lives in the world. Setting up some ways in which we live with God and ways that we are supposed to live with one another. Very important things. Well, Alain de Botton comes up with 10 virtues that he says are most important for living in this world. And this becomes the foundational principles of this Church of the Atheist. Manifesto. And it begins with resilience. As a human being, you keep going even when things are looking dark, accepting that reversals are normal in life, but you continue to go on. I heard an interesting expression the other day. Sometimes you're the pigeon, sometimes you're the statue. Sometimes things go really good, sometimes things go really bad. But that's life. And that's what resilience is all about. Number one rule in your life is to keep going even when things look bad. Because, life is not always good. Empathy. If you have resilience, empathy is another thing that you need to have. The capacity to connect imaginatively with the sufferings and unique experiences of another person. To be able to be empathetic towards other people. To be able to show some caring and compassion for others is very important. To connect with them and to understand that their sufferings are sufferings that are a part of the human existence. Here we go. Patience. We lose our tempers, he says, because we believe that everything should be perfect. And when things are not perfect, we get upset, we get mad. When people don't act the way we want them to act, we get upset with them. We need to have more patience in our lives because it's a very important thing to have. Things are not perfect. They never will be perfect. And as much as I try, I'm never going to be perfect, and neither are you. And so we need to be able to practice a little bit more patience when things don't quite go our way. Sacrifice. The human being, he says, is hardwired to seek our own advantage. Looking out for number one is always most important. Self-image, self-attitude, self-understanding, self-need are the things that drive us as human beings. But we have to give up our desire for our own satisfactions in the name of someone else or in the name of something else. We can, in fact, sacrifice somewhat in order to help other people or in order to help society at large. Politeness. Wow, is this something we need today or what? We need to learn manners, the necessary internal rules of civilization. Simple politeness is something that our world certainly could use. Politeness in political discourse is something that's absolutely essential in our day and age, but how often do we see that? Well, here's the way the Manifesto for Atheists puts it. Politeness is closely linked to tolerance, the capacity to live alongside people whom one will never agree with, but at the same time can't avoid. There are people who live side by side, maybe even here at Rydal Park, who have very different beliefs and very different tastes and very different understandings of how the world works, and yet we have to live side by side. We may never agree with somebody that we met. Their beliefs may be so different than ours. We can't avoid them. And so politeness and tolerance, the ability to recognize the worth and value of someone else, even those we disagree with, is something that we need to have. Actually, I kind of like that one. Humor. Seeing the funny side of situations and of yourself doesn't sound very serious, but it is integral to wisdom. Life sometimes is very funny. The human experience, even in times of difficulty, can be quite humorous. And recognizing the ability to have humor and to see the funny sides of situations sometimes helps us to understand things a little bit more clearly. It's integral to wisdom. Self-awareness. This is a good one. I like this. To know oneself is to try not to blame others for one's troubles and one's moods. It's all because of my parents and the way they raised me that I am the way that I am, and it's all their fault, not mine. My life is a mess because of other people had done this. Well, that's an attitude that's out there in our world. But self-awareness is important to know oneself, to know who you truly are, and to know that sometimes the troubles that you have and the moods that you have are directly a result of your own thinking, lifestyle choices, things like that. Self-awareness, knowing who you really are. Forgiveness. And I love the way they put this one. A long memory of all the times when we wouldn't have got through life without someone cutting us some slack. A long memory of that. A memory of our entire span of our years of existence. Because, well, maybe it's just me, but I know I've made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake in my life. And people have always cut me slack and forgiven me along the way. Maybe I need to hold on to that and to remember those times when somebody was gracious to me, which means now I have to be gracious towards other people. If I know myself very well, and I have a memory of all the times when I have been forgiven, now it just might motivate me to become more forgiving in relationships with other people. Hope. The way the world is now is only a pale shadow of what could one day be. If we were to try to live out these virtues of the atheist understanding, well, the world could be a different place if we tried to do that. We could shape and motivate and change the world even in small ways of our own doings. The way the world is now is just a shadow of what it could one day be. And confidence. A constant awareness of how short life is and how little we ultimately lose from risking everything. These are the virtues of the Church of the Atheist. They don't have a God. They don't believe in that, or they can't recognize that God could exist. There's no evidence rationally to show that God does or doesn't exist. There's no way that we fit into the belief system of Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or any of the other religions that are out there in the world. We are just kind of out there on our own. But we miss the community. We miss the fellowship. We miss the things that we can do as people. We are good people. We are good parents. We are good citizens. Why can't we have a place where we can get together to meet? We're none of the above. We're called the nuns. And yet, deep down inside, even with all of these virtues, what we find here among a group of people who call themselves atheists and agnostics is a deep yearning for religious experience. And it's a religious experience they're finding in a new and vastly different way. So maybe the Church of the Atheist isn't such a strong dichotomy. Maybe it actually fits together to work, because actually, looking at all of those virtues, all 10 of them, well, I think they're things that were instilled in my life, in my progression of growing up in the Christian experience, of finding all of those things at work. Maybe there is deeply in the heart of the atheistic tradition some real religious significance. That's where we finish up for today. Next week, we're going to pick up with something all new and different. We've covered the gamut of Christianity. And I'm ending up today with this. Starting with next week, next Friday afternoon's class, we're going to start looking at the traditions of Islam. How the Islamic tradition began, how that faith began to spread throughout the world, and then we're going to look at various aspects of Islam as it exists in our world today. So that's where we'll be going in the future. I hope you enjoyed this presentation today, and I hope that we have a chance to see you, well, be present with you, well, whatever way we call it, here in our isolation next week. Have a wonderful day. Take care.